Happy to be joined by my friend Ed Werder. I always think if you want to know anything that is going on in the very complicated mind of Jerry Jones, what's my first call? Ed
Stephen
Werder.
Jones.
Yeah. Well, Ed, thanks for joining me. And I want to start by saying, obviously, you were in the stadium for the Cowboys meltdown against the Green Bay Packers on Sunday. And I want to know if you can tell me two things to start. Tell me, what was the environment in the stadium as the game totally went off the rails? I know TV showed, even in the middle and late in the third quarter, masses of people bailing out on that game, which for a playoff game is something. And then I want you to morph into what you saw and felt and heard after the game as the Cowboys tried to come to grips with this preposterous play, the way they played on Sunday.
Well, obviously, the Cowboys go into the game asking their fans to create whiteout conditions. They had a white towel with Carpe Omnia stenciled on it, which is seize everything, which is the theme for this season that Mike McCarthy created in the locker room, in the building, and hope would be carried over into the stadium, where, by the way, the Cowboys had won 16 consecutive home games, had been the highest scoring team in the entire league at home, playing a Packers team whose quarterback Jordan Love is making his very first postseason start and has nothing but first and second year players at wide receiver. Generally, the Packers were one of the most inexperienced playoff teams in the field in decades. And so I thought that they were incredibly bold, which, talking to Matt LaFleur, the Green Bay coach, before the game, is what he told me. He said, "Hey, we are young, but we are eager, and we love to prove people wrong." And he said, I promise you one thing. We're going to go out there and we're going to take our swing. And the first chance at that came when they won the coin toss and took the ball. And they were determined to score first and force the Cowboys to play from behind, which they did. The Cowboys never led in this game. The last time the Cowboys never led in a home game was when they played a wild card game against the 49ers and got eliminated. So watch Jerry Jones come down the elevator from his suite, walk very solemnly toward the locker room. As he explained afterward, it was one of the most painful losses he's ever experienced because of the expectations he had for this team. And these weren't just Jerry expectations. Like, everybody thought the Cowboys were perfectly set up because of an unexpected sequence of events. At the end of the season, they're able to get the number 2 seed. They don't have to play the 49ers or anywhere else on the road unless they play San Francisco in the championship game. It was set up for them. And then to fail the way they did, I think one of the most inglorious exits in Cowboys playoff history, and maybe the worst loss I've ever seen them experience. The locker room, pretty quickly cleared out. We did talk to Dak Prescott at the podium. We talked to Mike McCarthy, who only spoke for like 3 minutes and 39 seconds after the game. Everybody, of course, flocks to Jerry after every game, and especially after a loss like that, because he makes all the big decisions, and we want to know what was on Jerry's mind. And I think that he was not very emotional in the aftermath of the game and assessing where this franchise stands and where it goes next in terms of Mike McCarthy going forward. Because, Peter, he had 4 hours to rationalize the whole thing, right? It wasn't a last-second thing, and then there's Jerry talking about a loss. It was a loss from the first possession of the game, in effect. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know what to expect from Jerry, but I think Mike McCarthy's contract he just finished the 4th year of a 5-year deal, so this would be a natural point at which any owner would address the contract of his head coach, and so I presume that's the process that has begun right now at the Star today.
Ed, as we record this, it's Tuesday late morning, and I think it's one of the things that happens in our business is that we jump to conclusions. I'm jumping to conclusions right now about Philadelphia. I don't know how, based on the last 6 or 7 weeks, the Eagles bring Nick Sirianni back, but that could be rash. It probably is rash. But I think in Dallas, this really kind of reminds me in a different way, but not altogether different. It reminds me of the time when Jerry Jones was a little bit, what's the right way? When Jerry Jones was sort of desperate to get away from a time in his franchise where he felt rudderless. And that was the time when he hired Bill Parcells. It was 21 years ago. And I think he felt like, I need to slap this franchise in the face. And I need to do something drastic. The reason why this is totally different is the Cowboys now are not coming back from 6-10. The Cowboys are coming back from 3 consecutive, hugely disappointing playoff exits after going 12-5, now consistently. So you win 12 games and you fire the coach seems incredibly rash. And I just want to ask you, in Jerry's mind, make it make sense. Does it make sense to you that he could replace this coach?
Well, Mike McCarthy has unquestionably taken a franchise that was not a consistent winner and not a perennial playoff team under Jason Garrett and created a winning formula that, as you said, has produced 3 consecutive 12-win seasons. Look, the Cowboys have had 3 Hall of Fame coaches, if you count Bill Parcells, Jimmy Johnson and Tom Landry and Bill Parcells, and none of them ever won 12 games 3 years in a row, as Mike McCarthy has. But that's not necessarily a crowning achievement because it becomes more of an indictment when you look at what happened then when they got to the postseason and they went 1-3, and 2 of the losses are at home. And this one was particularly catastrophic because of what I said about how dominant they've been at home. And so if you're Jerry Jones and you look at it like, how can I turn what happened in our final game into something positive? Like, I don't see how he can restore the faith of the public in this franchise and in this coach. So
that's the issue.
I think what you're suggesting is, hey, Jerry Jones has always been an opportunistic owner. He has always believed when something is available that shouldn't be, I should be involved in trying to acquire that asset. That was his mindset when he signed Deion Sanders, one of the greatest players in the history of the game. Somehow, through an extraordinary event, he is available. I'm going to sign him. And he did it against the judgment of his own son, Stephen Jones, whom I mentioned earlier. And so I think Bill Belichick fits that profile too. And that's where I think you were trying to leave me. And there are a lot of reasons why Bill Belichick wouldn't work and might not accept the job here, or Jerry might decide not to offer him the job should he ultimately decide that change is definitely necessary. But can you imagine the only way to make the Cowboys bigger than they are and to make what happened the other day into a positive is to bring in Bill Belichick? You're talking about combining the Dallas Cowboys and the history of this franchise and the visibility and the attention it attracts to a whole new level. Bring in the only guy who's won 6 Super Bowl rings and needs 15 more wins to become the winningest coach in the history of football. And that's what's in it for Jerry, and that's what's in it for Belichick. Belichick needs 2 things. He wants to become the winningest coach in the history of football, and Dallas has the roster to allow that to happen, we presume, in more quickly than anybody else. And it also allows him the opportunity to do what? Win a Super Bowl without Tom Brady. Guess what Jerry Jones still needs to do 30 years later? Win a Super Bowl without Jimmy Johnson's influence. And so for all of those reasons, it's perfect, right? The problem becomes, to me, both of these guys' egos, and are they going to be willing under the circumstances and the opportunity I just described? Is Bill Belichick going to be okay, as he suggested, if somebody else handles personnel? Because Will McClay is going to do that for Jerry Jones. And Stephen Jones is going to have that role. And is he going to be okay with Jerry Jones twice a week being on the radio, right after games being outside the locker room, holding court as he does to the detriment of the coach and his audience? Or is Jerry going to concede that he's willing to not do that, as he did for Bill Parcells? The thing I think, Peter, is Jerry, through the Bill Parcells experience, learned a lot. He liked Parcells. He admired what he knew about football and how much he gave Jerry Jones an education in football. But the one thing I remember, his biggest takeaway was, I hated that because I could not be who I want to be as the owner of this franchise. I could not engage the players the way I wanted to. I could not, as the owner, walk in that locker room or that weight room and having talk to a player without potentially offending Parcells. He didn't like that whole thing. But under the circumstances, maybe that's a concession he's willing to make.
I'll ask you this. Jerry Jones has to be considered to be an extremely intelligent man in both street smarts and business smarts. If you were Jerry Jones right now, and one of the greatest coaches, I'm not one who blindly calls Belichick the best coach of all time. He might be, but I think we are an extremely, let me put it this way. People who cover pro football lead the world in recency bias. And I'm not saying that he isn't the best coach of all time, but I'm not willing to say, oh, by the way, Paul Brown doesn't count, but be that as it may, I think that Jerry Jones is such a smart guy that he conceded a lot of things when Bill Parcells came. Yeah. And Bill Parcells turned the team around, not to a champion, but made them respectable and made them pretty good again. And so that's one part of this whole thing. The second part is to think, if you are Jerry Jones and you don't even know how many years you have left on this planet. Once you get to be in your 80s, you don't have a lot longer left in your life. And you have to ask yourself, the most important thing in my world is the Dallas Cowboys. With all respect to my family, but the most important thing to me is the Dallas Cowboys. And what can I do right now to put them in the best position to give me that beloved next championship that I have lived the last 30 years trying to get to, or almost 30 years. So, Ed, I understand and I respect exactly what you say. But if Jerry Jones were to sit down with Bill Belichick and he didn't accept Belichick's requests, you're not doing any more press conferences after the game. That's it. Those are gone. They're bad. They're bad for the team. We're not doing those anymore. So you say, listen, I want that. And what Jerry could say to Belichick is, he said, you're not doing personnel. That should be in the first 10 minutes of their meeting. Listen, we're not changing the way we do personnel. And I love you, and I'd really love you to be our coach. But this is the way we do personnel. And if you can't, that's the way we did it with Parcells. You will be the dominant voice. Coaches are a dominant voice in that room, but you're not going to make the picks. That's it. And if that doesn't work, we should shake hands, have a bro hug, and say, see you later. But the fact that Jerry Jones might be saying and might be thinking that I really want Belichick, but I'm not willing to do what it takes to get Belichick in terms of how I would change, then he's not a very smart man.
Well, Jerry is a very smart man, and he's a particularly smart businessman. But he's also somebody who doesn't like being overshadowed. That experience has been bad for him every time he's had it, whether it was with Jimmy Johnson or it was with Bill Parcells. And those are probably the only two coaches where that occurred. So the question is, have there been enough empty Januaries for Jerry yet to make the sacrifice? He
Great
has always
question.
said, he's always said, I'll do anything I can to win another Super Bowl. I'll pay whatever it takes to pay. So paying a coach wouldn't be, if he's being truthful, paying Bill Belichick, whatever it is, top of the scale, wouldn't matter, even though Jerry's history and mindset has always been, I don't have to pay head coaches, and I don't believe in paying head coaches. There are exceptions, and certainly Belichick would be one. It's a little ironic that we're judging McCarthy so harshly on recent events and recent games and overlooking what's happened with Belichick in New England most recently, where 3 of his last 4 seasons have been epic disasters. But yeah, yes, I think just in general, not just what Jerry's role is and how public he's allowed to be is a factor. It's like Belichick's going to change the building. Like, it's not going to be, the players are not going to have the relationship with the coaching staff, Belichick's coaching staff, that they have with McCarthy and his coaching staff. It's not going to be, a bunch of bro hugs and backslaps, and is Jerry willing to do that? Is he convinced that it will make the difference, that hiring Belichick will result in Super Bowls? Like I said, he's going to look at it in my mind like, this guy should not be out there. And oh my God, he's there when I need him most. Now, is this where Bill wants to coach? You mentioned the roster. Geez, how could he argue about, I'm not going to have control of the roster? Well, look at your roster in New England compared to what you're inheriting in Dallas, presumably.
Agree, totally.
Totally. They had nine
his personnel. Yeah, his personnel has been his handling of personnel has been an abject disaster. I would argue that over the last 10 years, nobody in the NFL has been worse at forming a roster than Bill Belichick. And it's crazy to say he won 2 Super Bowls in that time. But his roster right now, look at his first-round picks. Look at his top picks. They are an abject disaster. And I mean, this is not the podcast about that. But to me, Bill Belichick is the guy for Dallas unless he comes in with demands that would surprise me based on his recent history. I want to end by just asking you one other question. I'm sure that I'm not alone in thinking that the big game performance, playoff performance of Dak Prescott in recent years would be somewhere between worrisome and incredibly off-putting. But this is why I want to ask this question. There are some times when a player needs a coach to come in and to treat the quarterback, the billboard of the franchise, the no doubt number one person from a player standpoint in the building. And a coach has to come in sometimes if it's not working and bring him down a peg or two. And I remind you of the way Belichick, which used to totally anger Tom Brady, that Bill Belichick would treat Tom Brady like one of 53, not some exalted, wonder kind. And so I'm just saying, my feeling is, if I were Dak Prescott, here's why I would want Bill Belichick. Because the kind and gentle teaching with no, finger in your, and look, we don't know. Maybe Mike McCarthy has been tough at times on Dak Prescott. I don't know. It's possible, but it really doesn't seem like that's the way Mike McCarthy is. I think Dak Prescott, absent somebody kind of shaking him down to his core, is not going to get to the great place that he would want to get to as an NFL quarterback.
Well, he's 2-5 in the postseason, and he lost a home game in a season where he was virtually the MVP. And I think that it's fair to say, to your point about how he's been coached and how hard it's been, I would say that the way he'd be coached by Bill Belichick and presumably Josh McDaniels, if he winds up being the offensive coordinator, would be harsher than he experienced with Jason Garrett or Mike McCarthy. I think that would be fair to assume. I also know Dak.
Fair. It would be incredibly obvious, I think, but yeah.
Well, like you said, we don't know what goes on behind closed doors.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I also know this about Dak Prescott. He wants to be great. He thinks he's capable of greatness. So while I went into this last game thinking there's no way, like Dak would fist fight Jerry if he tried to fire McCarthy, because he embraced this change with McCarthy. He loved Kellen Moore. Kellen Moore was his teammate since he came in the league. He was either his teammate or his coach. And yet the consequences of the loss last year were Kellen Moore's not calling plays anymore. He's out of the organization. McCarthy's calling the plays. Dak didn't like it initially, but he embraced it and made the best of it. And I don't think now that he would be in a position to resist the change if Jerry wanted to make it. But I do think, I remember when they hired John Kitna and he came to the Pro Bowl and Dak was in the Pro Bowl. Kitna gets on the bus, sees Dak and asks if he can sit next to him. And he says, sit right there and tell me how you're going to make me great. Like, I want to be great. What can you do? And Josh McDaniels always said that, Tom Brady was like, hey, if you're every day, every meeting, if you're not here to make me better, why are you here? And I think Dak has that quality about him. He's an incredibly hard worker. He's a high
indeed all that
guy.
Is true. Yeah. If indeed that all is true, and I absolutely believe it's all true, deep down, Dak Prescott would have to be disappointed. You say he might want to have a fist fight with Jerry. Those two things are at cross purposes. That he would want to fight Jerry to bring back Mike McCarthy. Every fan who roots for the Dallas Cowboys. Yeah.
That was my feeling going into last Sunday.
Yeah. So I just think deep down, Dak Prescott would be disappointed if they ran it back.
I think if
the other thing,
they got a decision to make on him in the offseason too, because he's going to count $60 million against their cap. And, they got Trey Lance. That's a new factor in the equation. I can't see them paying Dak $60 million so they can play Trey Lance. But if you're Jerry Jones, don't you have to look at it like, this is 8 years. He's going into his 9th year, and we're still asking the question, is he the right guy to lead us back to a Super Bowl? Like, you should know that by now, shouldn't you? And maybe Jerry is convinced that under the right circumstances, and maybe Bill Belichick is the right circumstance, that he is capable of doing that. But this is not traditionally the way we've seen it work for quarterbacks. Matthew Stafford is an exception. John Elway's an exception. They won their first Super Bowls late in their careers. And so maybe Jerry does correctly believe that Dak's capable. The right circumstances in terms of coaching have not yet been created for him. But man, did they blow a chance the other day.
I don't think they would have won the conference anyway. I think it's unrealistic to think that they're going to San Francisco and winning a playoff game. I've seen that movie too many times.
There was no reason to. Yeah, you're right. There's no reason to think they were going to beat the 49ers because they haven't in 3 straight years, and 2 of those times the 49ers end their season in the playoffs.
Ed, I'll just ask you this. End with this. What do you think the timeline is right now? What do you think Jerry's mindset is in these next few days?
I think by Thursday or Friday we'll know if Mike McCarthy is going to return as the head coach, and whether it's. I don't think he's going to get a contract extension. I think, if anything, if Jerry keeps him, it'll be because he believes he can't get or doesn't want Bill Belichick. And he'll do to Mike McCarthy what he did to punish Jason Garrett, which was, you're going to coach out the last year of your contract. He did that twice to Jason Garrett. And at some level, Jerry believed that would bring out the best in him. It would create an urgency and a desperation. And unfortunately for him, the way it turned out, that did happen. Garrett performed his best when he was working on the last year of his contract, and that led Jerry to stay with him for 10 years to no avail. Never produced a Super Bowl. But I think next 48 hours or so, I think Jerry will know whether Mike McCarthy's talked him into giving him another chance. And I think the only person he would make a change for is Bill Belichick. Although if I were him, I would also consider Mike Vrabel because this team lacks toughness, especially on defense, and that's what Vrabel's all about. And Jerry does believe philosophically in the Vrabel style of football, which is, hard physical run team, plays great, tough defense. But I really just think at this point it's Belichick or it's McCarthy.
I think that's a gigantic mistake. Gigantic. I agree with you totally. If you can't get Belichick, you got to get Vrabel. But you need to make a change. You just do. You need to make a change. You cannot run this back. You just can't. Anyway, my opinion. Ed Werder, thanks so much. 15 minutes became 26 because you are a genius. Ed,
hopefully they let me run it back, Pete. See ya.
For many, many years to come. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.